This video lecture is going to focus on the next topic in the course, and that is the progressive movement, 1900 to 1920. So I think you'll notice that we are now entering into the 20th century, leaving behind the 19th century. That means we're making progress, which is always a good thing, and that's what the progressive movement's all about, making progress. I put together a series of images here on this opening page to let you kind of ponder and think about the various aspects of the progressive movement, because the progressive movement is fairly complicated, because it's not one movement, it's many different movements. It's not one group, it's many different groups. And it's not one agenda, it's many different agendas. So it makes the progressive movement difficult to really kind of study, because you can't really put your arms around it in a way that is satisfactory to most people. But we're going to do our best to sort of break it down and to look at that. And you see in the lower left-hand corner a book written by somebody in the time period. Lincoln Steffens was a journalist who authored The Shame of the Cities, and he really looked into what was going on in the big cities that came about and became really populated during the Gilded Era. And we know that while some lived a very comfortable life, the upper class and the middle class, the working class and the immigrants in particular lived in pretty awful and deplorable conditions, where there was filth and poverty and high crime rates. So what Lincoln Steffens did was used his pen to expose that to the world. And you'll see another book on the upper row there called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, another writer who again used the pen, and he investigated the meat packing industry. Americans love meat. I don't know how much that's changed. Some people are now adopting different eating habits, such as vegetarians and vegans. However, meat's still a staple in the American diet. And where does all this meat come from? Well, it comes from farms and meat packing plants. And so what Upton Sinclair did was went into meat packing plants in the early 1900s and observed what was going on and wrote about it in a much celebrated but also disgusting novel called The Jungle. So here we see two writers. So that says that there's a group of writers, middle-class educated writers, who are looking into certain aspects of society. The other thing you'll see is Down with Monopoly in that sort of newspaper there. The progressives were most interested in breaking up the large trusts, some 300 that had come into existence during the Gilded Age, because they felt that trusts were unfair, uncompetitive, and promoted concentration that we saw when we talked about imperialism, that concentration that led to the accumulation of wealth and power by a few companies and a few owners, but really left everybody else out in the cold, literally. You can see also a group of women holding, two women, not a group of women, but two women holding a sign, "Votes for Women." This is a great time when women become very active in demanding equality, at least democratic equality. And many don't know this, maybe you do know this, which is great, but women did not have the right to vote in political elections. That was one of their big causes that they championed, and they are going to actually succeed by 1920, getting an amendment to the U.S. Constitution allowing women to vote. You can see there in the picture two gentlemen standing outside. The one on the left, although you can't really see him, it is President Theodore Roosevelt, with another man, a conservationist and a naturalist. I believe that's John Muir. And they're out in the wilderness. And Roosevelt is going to be one of the first modern presidents, and he's going to be one of the first presidents interested in the environment and in creating open spaces that people can enjoy and preserving those open spaces. So we see environmentalism being born in the progressive time period, and President Roosevelt and others taking the lead in that. You see at the lower right a curious picture, a woman dressed up in 19th century, early 20th century garb, carrying an axe. I don't know if you can see that, but that's an axe, and also a book that's probably, though I'm not sure about this, probably the Bible in the other hand. That's Carrie Nation. And she led the fight against alcohol, and she that movement that fight against alcohol was known as the temperance movement. They were trying to ban alcohol from the United States because they felt that alcohol did bad things to people. It made men in particular violent. It made them lazy. They would take their hard-earned money and go and, sorry for that interruption, but men would spend their money in bars and then do other things as well. So Carrie Nation took her hatchet into bars and actually began to break them up. Of course, she was arrested multiple times. She got out on bail and continued to go and smash bars up, literally. Interesting figure. So there are some really colorful figures in our history. The eagle up above that you see there is the symbol of the United States Federal Reserve System. Maybe not as colorful and interesting, but the Federal Reserve System is what, in fact, controls our money supply today, or the banking system today in the United States, which is tied to money, of course. Up until 1913, when the Federal Reserve System came into existence, there was no national currency. There was no national bank, and therefore you had lots of you had state banks and lots of local banks that were dealing with money and the banking system, but it was very loose. It was not well coordinated, and this caused economic problems of great magnitude. So with the Federal Reserve System now that we have and that we trust, most of us don't think about it much anymore. We just happen to have this green stuff printed on paper that we call money that we pull out, and often today we use cards or other means of payment. So that's sort of an overview of the progressive movement, 1900 to 1920. So let's move forward then and see if there is any way that we can attempt to define the progressive era. And as I said before, I think there are many groups that have many goals, but they all share, I think, one cause. So many groups, many goals, one cause, and that is to restore justice and a sense of morality to the United States. Many again, middle-class individuals in particular felt that the laissez-faire system that we had in place, that is free market capitalism that grew incredibly fast during the Gilded Age, was out of control. That is, it was really limiting the opportunities of many, particularly workers, who weren't able to compete and therefore needed help. So progressives are then going to be middle-class, college-educated men and women who believe that powerful corporations undermine competition and use their wealth to disrupt and destroy both capitalism and democracy. So I think that's a big part of the definition. And this group of reform-minded people really came onto the stage of history and entered the story of the history of the United States in the immediate post-Gilded Age. So again, we're dealing with around 1900, which is a convenient thing to look at. And I guess another thing I could have put up here is that kind of that seesaw that I drew on the board many times at the beginning of the year, because the progressives very much wanted to restore balance between, on one hand, capitalism and how it functioned, and democracy and how it functioned. Again, to restore that balance, that sense of order to American society. So the reformers that are today known as progressives and their story largely follow the path of Jane Addams, a middle-class woman who led a life of leisure, traveling to Europe. She was college-educated, and she gave that all up to go and live and work in the city amongst the working poor and the immigrants of Chicago. So you can see that there's this idea of action over thought, and I think that's an important thing. So I have two things on the right that might be, like the microscope. What's that doing here? That's something you use in science. Well, that's exactly it. The progressives, again, being college educated, believed that if you just studied problems, and that you could get to the root cause of those problems, and then that you could develop solutions, create systems that would correct and reform and solve the various problems. And the pen then, so the microscope is the idea of examining something very closely under the microscope, to see it up very close, to determine how things are operate, how they're put together, etc. The idea of the pen then is, well, you study something, then you're going to write about it. And as I said, you already saw in the previous slide those images of books. There were also, in addition to novels and books, a number of magazines. McClure's and oddly enough, Cosmopolitan magazine got its start, not what it is today, but it got its start as a progressive, reform-minded magazine where people wrote about ideas that they felt needed addressed in society. So I hope that's, again, a way to think about the progressives. Again, a difficult concept to necessarily narrow down, but let's go into this a little bit more precisely. So what is it that they really, the progressives that is, really advocated? Well, they were against monopolies. They were against the large trusts, Carnegie, Rockefeller, they're huge corporations. They wanted to break those up and restore competition and fairness in the economic system known as free market capitalism. They promoted we the people, that is, they wanted to restore democracy, something we've talked a lot about. They believed in organization, that if you could only be more organized, you would be more efficient, you would be more productive, and you would be happy. Think about our own lives. Think about yourself. How organized is your backpack, your locker, your room, your car if you happen to have one? Can you find what you need when you need it, and then get down to work and get it done quickly and efficiently and well, by the way? That's something that the progressives really thought about a lot. The progressives wanted to help victims of the out-of-control capitalism, in particular women and children, and also the immigrant workers in particular. But women and children in particular, we're going to see important advances made to protect women and children as a special class of people. The progressives also believed in promoting freedom for all people. That includes women who didn't have certain rights. That includes African Americans who were largely excluded from enjoying the fruits of democracy and the fruits of capitalism, a result of the legacy of slavery and the sort of failed attempts to promote through constitutional amendments after the Civil War this sense of equality for all people. And they also then, it connects to the last point, the progressives wanted to promote the good life for all, that all people should be able to enjoy the prosperity and the opportunities that the Gilded Age had produced in the United States of America, making the United States of America an exceptional place, a unique place that many people wanted to come to from other parts of the world. So that being said, I think now we've gotten a really good look at the idea of the definition of progressivism. So I just pop back to that slide to then go and look at it more precisely here. So let's move on. One last thing about progressivism that I think kind of helps me. I'm a visual learner, and there's a bicycle wheel with spokes that converge in the hub, the gears there in the center of that bicycle wheel. So I think progressivism is a lot like a bicycle wheel, and that is many spokes come together to support the strength and integrity of the wheel, and those spokes really are these individual actors, such as women, immigrants, African Americans, unions, that is workers, religious leaders, writers, and politicians. So each spoke would be that a different group of people that all converge in the center, and the idea is they're again trying to promote the rebirth, the restoration of American democracy, the restoration of a sense of morality, of goodness, of justice, to the American way of life. And I can't say it any simpler than that. So restore justice, restore democracy, restore morality. That is the sense of right and wrong. And we should know what right and wrong is. Of course, sometimes that's not always obvious, but that was the belief of the progressives. So moving on to then, let's look at just one example of a progressive. There are a couple more. I don't know if we'll have time in this lecture, but we're going to look at President Theodore Roosevelt, who became the president in 1901. He's known as the accidental president because he was not elected president. He was the vice president for William McKinley. William McKinley was shot and killed in 1901 in September by an anarchist who was outraged and angered by what was going on in society. Therefore, Vice President Theodore Roosevelt becomes President Theodore Roosevelt. And he really kind of surprised many people because he was a very active, energetic man. You can see him there giving a speech, and I don't know if the picture does it justice, but he has this clenched face, a balled up fist, and he was a very energetic, athletic speaker when he spoke before large crowds, and he really believed in what he would call, or historians later would call, the square deal. Think about a square; it has 4 equal sides, and that idea is Roosevelt wanted to use his presidency and the government, think state action, the government state action, to restore fairness for the public and for the corporations, by the way. So he believed that the government had a definite role and place in restoring fairness, restoring justice, restoring democracy for public and for businesses. Some of the things he accomplished, that should be the Northern, I left the N off there, Securities Trust. That was a large railroad trust